live and pre-recorded. This is the Red Ticket Blues podcast. I am Brian Buckley. This is Hitting the Internets on January 16th, 2017. How's everybody doing? Remember, you can find this show on iTunes, TuneIn, Radio, Stitcher, YouTube, and Google Play. Follow me on Twitter at BrianBuck13 and at Red Ticket Blues. So we have a guest this week. Andrew Bucholtz of Awful Announcing was gracious enough to join me and discuss media today. All the major players, what's going on, what's going to happen going forward, that meaning ESPN, the Fox Sports, Barstool, things of that nature. Just have a good sports media conversation with a new age media outlet like Awful Announcing. So enough of me blabbing on and on. Let's hear from Andrew Bucholtz of Awful Announcing. So he is a writer at Awful Announcing and the lead blogger at Yahoo's 55-yard line dealing with Canadian football. He's Andrew Bucholtz. Andrew, thanks for coming on the Red Ticket Blues podcast.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. So what I've had in the past, we've had sort of the older guard in sports media review, the Northeast, Phil Mushnicks, the Bob Racemans, Bob Ryans, all of that. So I figured I'd have you on today as you sort of represent a younger, more, I guess I'm not hip, so I don't want to use the word hip, but a crowd in Awful Announcing. It is a website that I definitely love. It seems to be one of the only websites that really doesn't have much of an agenda, honestly. It's just sort of the news. But what about Awful Announcing really, stuck out for you? I mean, that made you want to go there and be there the last 5 years.
Well, I think one of the things I really love about working for Awful Announcing is I think we're pretty much the only site that does exactly what we do. There are other sites that do cover sports media, but usually it's a very small part of a larger picture. And I think we spend a lot of time focusing on it. I think we write about interesting stuff. And I appreciate what you say about us not having much of an agenda. I think we do our best, certainly, to try and be as fair as possible. To try and be as fair to all the people involved, all the networks involved, and but also to present what's important to readers and to viewers.
Yeah, in the hot take culture we live in, the notion of a website or an entity not having an agenda is kind of hard to even fathom. So I definitely do appreciate that in Awful Announcing. Now, I also don't want to leave out the fact that, you write about Canadian football. I have no idea about Canadian football. I'll be completely honest. I know it's had stars in the past. I guess the question I can ask here, I'm not really sure, but maybe you'd be able to tell me, has the recent dip in NFL ratings done anything to benefit Canadian football, or is the status of the sport itself remain changed?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's really having much of an impact on the CFL. In particular, I mean, the CFL is occasionally shown in the U.S. They have a deal with ESPN where all their games are streamed and some are televised, but they get minuscule ratings in the U.S. compared to the NFL. And even in Canada, the CFL ratings rebounded a bit this year, but they've also been down substantially over the last couple of years. So I don't think it's certainly not a lot of people going from the NFL to the CFL. However, the CFL is doing pretty fine for itself, especially in Canada.
Maybe that's a product that, if the NFL decide to take away the Thursday night game, just sort of something to fix throughout the week if there's not enough games going on and throughout the year. You bring up ESPN. Speaking of NFL ratings, I mean, and cord cutters, they're all involved. ESPN is losing millions of subscribers every few months, millions. Is there legitimate panic in Bristol, or is it the executives are they sort of looking at this problem as a too big to fail approach because, FS1 will always be that sort of redheaded stepchild in the corner?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mix of both things there. I think that people in Bristol, in particular, are still they're certainly concerned, but they definitely think they're going to ride this out. And I think even Disney, ESPN's parent corporation, all their executives are so positive about ESPN and bullish on ESPN, and this is going to work long term. And CEO Bob Iger, in particular, has consistently stated that. But the reason they do have to believe that is, as you say, ESPN is the dominant player in the sports marketplace. It's not even close between them and FS1. They have more competition from regular broadcasters, obviously, but ESPN is still the dominant figure in sports. They're certainly the dominant figure in cable sports, and that's part of what does help them, is that they get those cable per subscriber fees every month, as well as just advertising dollars. So there are big challenges for them, but their leadership is still certainly confident in them. The people who aren't, though, are the Disney investors, and that's what we see every time there's a Disney earnings call and the Disney stock takes a tumble as a result, and people blame it on worries about ESPN. Because it's remarkable, if you look at every other division of Disney, they're doing astoundingly well. They're doing great in the theme parks. They're just blowing away records at the box offices, especially with Star Wars and with Marvel things. And ESPN is seen as really a big drag on the stock price by a lot of investors.
You know, I mean, obviously ESPN has its issues, like you just talked about. I mean, it's affected with its boss itself, Disney. So like in any business, you want to change the model a bit. And from my perspective, it seems like ESPN is sort of changing their model, especially with their personalities, towards race. Now, race is prevalent in a lot of sports headlines. We all know that. But it seems like maybe a little contrarian sometimes. Most recently, the Around the Horn crew, and later Bomani Jones and Jamel Hill, implying an entire city in Boston, which has had racial issues, is a racist city. And let's not forget, it's also a very big sports city. Is this bad for business, or is this just sort of chatter to stay relevant and sort of project themselves to an audience that's dwindling?
Well, I mean, I think that's an interesting point. I don't think that ESPN management or John Skipper or anyone at the senior executive level is telling their personalities what to think or what to say on a specific issue like that. With that said, I think they certainly are employing and they are promoting people who do have some controversial views at times. But again, I mean, this isn't new. They employed Skip Bayless for a long time. They employed Colin Cowherd for a long time. And some of those controversies that those guys created were about race and
100%, you're right.
In different ways or another. So I think maybe what people are reacting to now is maybe you're seeing some discussions about race maybe in a slightly different way than you were before, or from a different perspective. But I don't think the idea of bringing up race and causing some controversy is new to ESPN.
That's a great point. You know, I say this as sort of, how they're impugning an entire city. Let's not remember Colin Cowherd impugned an entire country in the Dominican Republic. So that's an excellent point by you. One of the former shining stars of ESPN, Bill Simmons, he's had obviously a rocky road, to say the least, since leaving the ESPN Grantland platform. His show on HBO was canceled. Let's start there. Hindsight is a beautiful thing, but I said from the beginning, I was, or still kind of am, a Bill Simmons fan, but I had no interest in watching him on camera wear flannel shirts talk about the Patriots. It just was not a really pleasant thing that I felt like doing. What did you think before the show when you heard Bill Simmons is going to do a show on HBO? What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good point there, that in a lot of ways, a TV and a TV hosting show is something that not even a lot of diehard Bill Simmons fans were really all that interested in. I guess I understand why people thought this would work and why HBO figured it was worth the investment. Because if you look at Bill Simmons' career, he has been spectacularly successful at a whole variety of different things. Starting out as a columnist, then really becoming an incredibly popular podcaster, coming up with documentary plans and ideas and so on with his work for 30 for 30, his work as editor-in-chief of Grantland. So I understand taking that gamble understandable, but I don't think TV really is necessarily the best platform for him, and certainly the format they eventually settled on for that show, I don't think it really showcased his strengths. So I think it's understandable why HBO went away from it the way as quickly as they did, because it simply wasn't really working for them.
This is completely an eye test of me, and I haven't really seen it reported that much, which is kind of my question. I see Bill Simmons with a Twitter follower count of over 5 million, and he's putting tweets out there about links on The Ringer, and it's barely getting anything. I mean, I'm getting more retweets, and I'm nobody. No one at all is zero on a Mike Francesa Photoshop. So, I mean, I look at him Is it being underreported, or am I prematurely saying The Ringer is a disaster?
Well, I don't know if it's a disaster. I mean, the thing that's difficult about saying it's a disaster is we're on the outside. We don't have their traffic numbers. We don't, and even more importantly, we don't have their financial numbers. I think there certainly are questions about how successful it is, though, and it certainly can be pointed out that it's not as popular as Grant was. Now, some of that is about it doesn't have access to the ESPN.com fire hose of traffic, where they were able to promote Grantland stuff on their main page and promote it from the ESPN accounts and so on. But as you point out, I mean, Simmons has a huge following, and even when he promotes Rainer stuff, it isn't getting all that much attention. We've written some stuff about this before, but there certainly are questions about the Rainer, about how long this model is going to work for it. There are bigger questions now with the changes that are coming to Medium, because of course they depend very much on Medium at this point. And so I think it's certainly worth wondering about how the Rainer is doing and how long it is going to stay. And I think something that's interesting about the difference between the Rainer and Grantland is Grantland managed to find some people who either already had somewhat of a following and gave them a much bigger following, and it found people who became big stars. And right. I don't think we've really seen that at the Rainer so far. I don't see the Rainer having a Jonah Carey or a Zach Lowe or so on. They have some incredibly talented writers. They have a lot of people who I enjoy reading. They have some very good nuanced analysis, but I'm not sure there's necessarily as many people who are destination content producers for a lot of people out there.
You know, I know we keep throwing that's a great point, roses at each other, but that's a great point too. The fact that I remember when The Ringer was released, I found it slightly obnoxious. The tweets about the rolling out of the tweets of these new employees. So people people that you've never heard of. They were, just somebody working at Uprocks and a very minor level. And it's just sort of like, I don't know what we were supposed to do to that. I mean, I'm glad that they got their recognition, but at the same time, who's that? That doesn't make me want to go to The Ringer. One last thing about The Ringer. Do you think that maybe the crowd, who Bill Simmons encases himself with, is just the fact maybe they're getting older, and that audience is getting older, and it doesn't really resonate well with the younger crowd?
Well, I think some of what he does resonates with the younger crowd, and I think there are some things on the Ringer that do an excellent job of that. One in particular I'd spotlight is Danny Kelly, who is somebody a lot of people haven't heard of, but I've followed him for a long time, and I think he's an incredibly smart, nuanced NFL writer, and his stuff does play very well with younger people. I think a lot of their pop culture stuff plays very well with younger people, but you're right that they certainly don't have as many big names. They don't have as many people who already had a following. And I think some of that, too, comes to this being more of an indie operation. Sure, it has some HBO backing and so on, but the Ringer is very clearly, it's Bill Simmons' website, and it's not linked to ESPN. The huge advantage that Grantland had was, sure, it was this Bill Simmons project, but it was under the ESPN banner.
Oh, 100%.
you were getting links from ESPN.com. They were having Grantland personalities sometimes do things on ESPN, appear on ESPN, and I think that makes it a lot easier to go and get people who are either already known or are real rising stars. And I think that's a big challenge that the Rainer is hitting.
Yeah, it's not as easy when you leave the parents' house. It gets a little more difficult.
Yeah.
So I just mentioned sort of the younger audience, the younger medium, and I think, this is my opinion, and I think some of what's hurt the Ringer is the emergence of Barstool Sports. Now, for the record, I'm not a Barstool fan. I'm not a hater either. I think the word hater gets thrown around a lot these days, as if I don't like something, I'm a hater, or if I retweet at all Barstool personalities 50 times a day telling them I don't like them, a hater. I respect what they've done. I think I'm 36 years old. 10 or 15 years ago, I probably would have worshipped the green grass that Barstool, grows on. How far do you think this company can go? I mean, do you think, every day I see them, they're involved with Sirius now. They're involved with Comedy Central. Is this just the tip of the iceberg with them, your ideas?
Well, it's fascinating to me that you bring Barstool up shortly after Bill Simmons, because I think there's a lot of parallels between what's going on with Barstool now and what was going on with Bill Simmons, say, 15 years ago. And the thing is, what they're doing is quite different. Barstool goes places that Bill Simmons never would have gone and never will go, but in they're sort of the push the envelope model that Simmons was when he first started really doing a lot of stuff on ESPN.com, and that there are people who clearly have a big fan base for their particular pushing of the envelope. I think there are some things they do well. There are reasons they have the big fan base they have. I think there's also some things they do that are incredibly problematic, and you point out some of the social media behavior in particular. I think, to me, it's interesting that not necessarily the people who work there, but the people who read Barstool Sports seem to identify with it so much and feel such ownership in it, and B, really just attack anyone who dares to say anything about it. And I'm not entirely sure why that is and why they have that to a degree you don't see anywhere else.
Yeah, Barstool's very exclusive. They don't work with other people. And like you said, their attacking is a large part of their model. But they go places. I think as time goes on, everything is on the table now. So the ideas that Barstool would go to and that Bill Simmons would never go to, it's a sign of the times. I mean, we also did have a Republican nominee bragging about the size of his penis at the last last debate. So I mean, that shows you where the world is now. So when you look at Barstool, I sort of think that they can basically do whatever they want. I mean, they could just type something. You could type, computer, and it'll be retweeted 700,000 times, and that'll become a meme. We talked about the personalities at the Ringer as they get older. Do you see Barstool having an issue with some of their founding fathers, so to speak, in Big Cat and Portnoy and PFT commentary? As those guys get older, do you think that will hurt the brand, or do you think they're well established enough where they can just keep creating personalities to keep this engine rolling?
I mean, I think the key for their long term really is going to be keeping tied into their audience and to keep continuing to provide what it is that audience wants. And I mean, sure, aging can affect that. Maybe people get tired of writing that stuff. Maybe they wind up turning to people who aren't as good at it or who aren't as tied into what their fan base wants to read. But I don't see necessarily an expiration date for it or an expiration date for those guys. I think something that is interesting too is I talked about Barstool going to places that Bill Simmons would never go, but in some ways, some of what they've done has been done on the internet before. I remember 10 or so years ago, when a lot of sports blogs were taking off, every major sports blog really made pictures of hot women, hot sideline reporters, hot cheerleaders. That was a big deal. And I think a lot of other major sports blogs have sort of moved away from that, have become more respectable, more quasi-mainstream, and in some ways, I feel Barstool is channeling some of the old blogosphere, and that's part of what's giving them their audience. And I don't think an audience is necessarily going to grow out of that.
Yeah, their inclusiveness of having their readers involved as well helps, especially reaching out to colleges and then making those, women who want to wear scantily clad things be a part of those. Then you look up any like major college there, and they may not be as popular as the big guys, but there's a Barstool associated with it. There is a Barstool Iowa State. There is a Barstool Clemson. That's something that you don't really hear about, but they're there. So they've definitely taken advantage of that. They are the new media, so to speak. What I was going to bring up with that, they are new media, like I said. Next year, one of the old guards of the old media in Mike Francesa will step down at WFAN. I bring Mike Francesa up because, embarrassingly, I am a fanboy. I'm from the East Coast, and I've listened to Mike Francesa since I was 12 years old. He will be stepping down next year. Now, have we seen the last of the X's and O's, surly, know-it-all gas bags like Francesa, or was he just one of a kind to begin with?
Well, I think in a lot of ways Francesa is one of a kind. I think that kind of run, that kind of dominance, and really in such a big market, I think that's going to be very tough for anyone else to replicate. However, I don't think his format necessarily. I don't think his format is necessarily going to go anywhere. I think there will be other people who try and do some of what he did, and some of them may do it well. But I'm not sure anyone else is going to have the same impact, and certainly for listeners over decades, the way Francesa did.
He says he's retiring, and I can't see him retiring. It's at the end of 2018. Mm-hmm. I don't think he has. I think he needs to argue and tell people how wonderful he is and how long he's been doing it and how many people he knows and all that. So do you see him actually retiring and fading into the sunset, or is this more of he says he's going to do something else. I don't know if I buy that. I can't see him getting involved in podcasts. Anything with technology is too much for him. I could see him taking a reduced role at WFAN, working less hours, a few less days a week. Do you see him actually, what do you see him doing, I should ask?
Yeah, I think a reduced role is certainly possible. I think I agree with you in that I think he's a guy who I'm not sure will give it up entirely. And the thing is, too, when you're a guy with that kind of name recognition, with that kind of a fan base, you're going to get a lot of very, very compelling and very lucrative offers, and plenty that involve a good amount of money for not a ton of work. So I'm not entirely sure what that's going to lead to for him. My bet would be that it's on something with less frequency than a daily show, whether that's occasional WFAN appearances or whether that's once a week podcast or whatever. But I do think we are not going to hear the last of him anytime soon.
So let me take off my Francesa fanboy hat and end where we started with here. So older media guys like I've had on the show, they're not very optimistic for a plethora of reasons. Some of them just won't embrace social media. I told Phil Mushnick he had a Twitter account and set up by New York Post. He told me he didn't. And I said, you know what? Forget it. You don't have one, Phil. Yeah. Got it. Bob Ryan is not optimistic about the future. I'm just name dropping like crazy here. Bob Ryan was not optimistic about the future as well. So this is a very broad question, Andrew. Do you like where sports media is going, and do you foresee any major changes in the near future?
Well, I think it depends on what part of it you're talking about. Right. I think online the state of sports media is great. I don't necessarily agree with everything that, say, a Barstool does, but I think the beauty of the internet is that you can read insightful X's and O's analysis pieces on the Ringer or on any number of like football or basketball focused sites, or you can read Barstool. You can read an SB Nation site that's devoted devoted to one particular college team. You can read Awful Announcing. Whatever there is you're interested in, you're going to be able to find it. And I think that's something that really hasn't existed outside of, say, the last 5 or 10 years. I think that's tremendously positive, and it's tremendously positive that a lot of people who wouldn't have been writing about sports decades ago are now doing so, and people who don't just come from traditional journalism backgrounds. The thing I'm a little more negative on is the state of the TV sports media, and you mentioned ESPN and some of the provocative takes and so on. We're certainly seeing that from ESPN. We're incredibly seeing that from Fox, which has made that really their whole identity for FS1 of just having the loudest, most thought-provoking take. Well, not thought. Most.
Yeah, you might want to take thought-provoking out of that.
Yeah, but like they want the takes that will get a reaction, whether they're considered or not, and whether they're insightful or not. And I think that's going to be the way that TV sports is going to go, at least for the next little while. And for those who do want the more nuance, who do want the more analysis-focused things, I think it's going to be harder to find things you like on TV. So that may drive people to consume less and less content outside of games and maybe spend their time reading things online instead.
I'm convinced all the minimal ratings that those quote-unquote debate shows on Fox and ESPN get, they're all from gyms because they're on 24/7. That is the ratings. Those are the only people that watch those shows. I've never met anyone in real life that watches First Take or Undisputed.
The thing there, though, is the sad thing is that Undisputed works. If you look at what Undisputed polls, and maybe it's not enough relative to whatever they're paying Skip Bayless, but if you look at what it polls compared to everything else Fox has tried, it's remarkable, and it's been one of their biggest non-live sports successes. And personally, I don't find that very optimistic, but I think it shows that there is an audience for that.
There's something there. So I want to thank you for coming on, Andrew Bucholtz. But before you go, I have 3 quick questions to play us out. You ready?
Sure.
Number 1, have you ever received a sports trophy not including a participatory one?
I have.
Okay, and which one is that?
I used to play soccer back in high school, and our team won a couple of tournaments.
There you go. All right, number 2, taking into consideration the release of the 2014 video of him punching a woman, will Oklahoma running back Joe Mixon be drafted in the NFL draft?
I think he'll definitely be drafted. I'm not sure how high he'll be drafted. I think that will lower his stock.
And number 3, who is the hottest hot take tweeter of them all?
Well, the hottest hot take leader would happen to be Jason Whitlock, who we just...
I saw that.
Blowing away the field, and we just wrote a piece announcing that we've retired him from the Hot Take Hall of Fame, because it just isn't fair to anyone else out there.
He is a writer at Awful Announcing and lead blogger at Yahoo's 55-Yard Line. You can follow him on Twitter at Andrew Bucholtz, Bucholtz, not spelled like the pitcher Clay. Andrew, I want to thank you for coming on the Red Ticket Blues podcast.
No problem. Thanks very much for having me.
Great stuff. Andrew was great. I was great. The whole podcast was great. I don't want to hear any dissenting opinions. You can listen to the show on iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, YouTube, and Google Play. Find all the old episodes, not just the new ones, the old ones too. And follow me on Twitter at BrianBuck13 and at Red Ticket Blues. Remember to leave reviews on all those podcasting venues because I think it's important. I'm going to question you going forward if you don't. With all that being said, enjoy yourself. I'm out of here.